Captain James Thornton stood tall in his crisp uniform at the entrance of the Boeing 737. His gray hair and kind eyes gave him a trustworthy look. For 22 years, he had flown planes safely across the skies. Passengers always felt calm when they saw him greeting them at the door. It was a busy Tuesday morning at Dallas Airport. Flight 302 to Chicago was almost ready for takeoff. James checked his watch. Only 15 minutes left before they would close the doors. "Good morning, Captain," said Sophia, the head flight attendant. "We're almost full today, just waiting for a few more passengers." James nodded and smiled. "Perfect. Weather looks good all the way to Chicago." Just then, they heard loud voices coming from the boarding area. 5 large men walked toward the plane. They wore black leather vests covered with patches and had long beards. The biggest one, with tattoos up and down his arms, laughed the loudest. "Those must be the last passengers," Sophia whispered, looking worried. The men stomped onto the plane, carrying heavy backpacks. Their leather boots made loud sounds on the floor. Passengers already seated looked up with surprise. "Where's our seats?" shouted the tallest biker, looking at his ticket. "Says we're in row 5. Sophia pointed to the front section of the plane. "Right this way, sir." The 5 men pushed past her, bumping into other passengers without saying sorry. They stuffed their large bags into the overhead bins, pushing aside smaller bags that were already there. "Hey, careful with those," a businessman said when his laptop bag was shoved aside. "Mind your own business," growled one of the bikers, a man with a skull tattoo on his neck. Captain James watched all this from near the cockpit door. His face showed no emotion, but he made a mental note about the group. In his years of flying, he had learned to spot trouble early. The lead biker caught James looking at them and stared back with cold eyes. "Got a problem, pilot?" he called out. "No problem at all," James replied calmly. "Welcome aboard Flight 302 to Chicago." The biker snorted and turned away. He said something to his friends that made them all laugh loudly. James stepped into the cockpit where his co-pilot, Rick Wilson, was already checking the systems. "Everything okay out there?" Rick asked, not looking up from the controls. 5 motorcycle club members just boarded, James said, sitting in his captain's chair. "They're a bit rowdy." Rick glanced at James. "Trouble?" "Not yet," James replied, putting on his headset. "But let's keep an eye on them." As they prepared for takeoff, James could hear the bikers talking loudly about a big motorcycle rally in Chicago. They were excited and already asking for drinks, even though the plane hadn't left the ground. "Doesn't sound like they'll quiet down anytime soon," Rick commented. James sighed. "Let's hope they settle once we're in the air." Little did he know, high above the clouds at 30,000 feet, those 5 men would turn this routine flight into something no one on board would ever forget. The plane had been in the air for 2 hours. Most passengers were quiet. Some slept while others watched movies on small screens. It was a peaceful flight, just the way Captain James liked it. But the 5 bikers in the front rows were getting louder. They had already finished several beers each. Their faces were red, and their voices grew stronger with each drink. "Hey, we need more drinks over here," shouted the big biker with tattoos. His name was Mike, and he seemed to be the leader of the group. Sophia, the flight attendant with 20 years of experience, walked over with a patient smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think you've had enough for now. How about some coffee or water instead?" Mike's face turned even redder. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked for more beer." The other bikers laughed and banged their hands on the small folding tables. The noise made a baby cry in the row behind them. "Please keep your voices down," Sophia said firmly. "There are other passengers trying to rest." "We paid for these tickets just like everyone else," said another biker with a long beard. "We can do what we want." He grabbed Sophia's arm when she tried to walk away. She pulled free and stepped back, her heart beating fast. "Don't you touch our staff," said Carlos, a male flight attendant who had come to help. The situation was getting worse. Other passengers looked scared. A woman with 2 children asked if she could move to seats farther back in the plane. Sophia knew she needed help. She walked quickly to the cockpit and knocked on the door in the special way that told the pilots it wasn't an emergency, but she needed to talk. When the door opened, she slipped inside and closed it behind her. "Captain, we have a situation," she said in a low voice. Her hands were shaking a little. The bikers in rows 5 and 6 are drunk and getting aggressive. They're demanding more alcohol, and one of them grabbed my arm. James and Rick exchanged serious looks. This was not good news. Are you okay? James asked, concerned for her safety. Yes, but they're scaring the other passengers. The big one with tattoos seems to be looking for trouble. Rick, the co-pilot, turned to James. Maybe we should land at the nearest airport and have security remove them. It was the safe choice. Many pilots would make this decision. Diverting the plane would mean landing in Denver, which was about 30 minutes away. James thought carefully. Landing early would cause problems for many passengers. People would miss connections in Chicago, but safety always came first. Let me try something before we change course, James said after a moment. I dealt with difficult passengers before. He picked up the plane's intercom microphone. Sophia, go back and tell those men that the captain would like to speak with them personally over the intercom in 5 minutes. Let's see if that gets their attention. Sophia nodded and left the cockpit. James turned to Rick. Keep us on course for now, but be ready to divert to Denver if things get worse. Little did the bikers know, Captain James Thornton was already forming a plan, and he was no ordinary pilot. Captain James waited 5 minutes, then picked up the intercom microphone. His voice was calm and firm as it filled the airplane. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. I'd like to remind everyone that for the safety and comfort of all passengers, we ask that you follow the instructions of our flight crew. Thank you for your cooperation. He put down the microphone and went back to checking the flight controls. He hoped his message would make the bikers behave better. But it didn't work. Mike, the leader of the bikers, got even angrier. So the big boss thinks he can tell us what to do, huh? He shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's see what he has to say to my face. The red seatbelt sign was on. Everyone was supposed to stay seated. But Mike stood up anyway. He pushed past his friends and stepped into the aisle. Sir, please return to your seat, Carlos the flight attendant said, standing in his way. The seatbelt sign is on. Mike poked Carlos hard in the chest. Get out of my way, I'm going to talk to your captain. Sophia quickly moved to help. Sir, you cannot go to the cockpit. It's against airline rules and federal law. Mike laughed. Watch me. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall with strong arms. He pushed both flight attendants aside and marched toward the front of the plane. Passengers looked scared. A mother covered her child's eyes. An old man reached for the call button. Everyone knew that aggressive behavior on a plane was dangerous. Someone stop him, a woman called out. But no one moved. The other bikers watched with big smiles, enjoying the show their friend was putting on. Mike reached the cockpit door and started pounding on it with his fist. Hey, Captain, come out here and talk to me like a man, he shouted. Bang! 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 His fist hit the door again and again. Inside the cockpit, James and Rick could hear the loud banging. That's it, Rick said, reaching for the radio. I'm calling Denver Air Traffic Control. We need to land and get this guy off our plane. James held up his hand. Wait. He looked at the security camera that showed the area outside the cockpit door. You could see the big biker standing there, still hitting the door and yelling. Many people would be afraid in this situation. Ever since the terrible events of the past, cockpit doors were kept locked during flights for safety. Pilots were taught to stay inside no matter what. But Captain James Thornton wasn't afraid. He had seen much worse in his life. I'm going out there, he said. Rick's eyes grew wide. Are you crazy? That's against all protocols. Sometimes you have to handle things personally, James replied, standing up. Keep the plane steady. I'll be back soon. What Mike and the other bikers didn't know was that Captain James wasn't just any pilot. Before flying passenger planes, he had a very different life, one that had prepared him perfectly for dangerous situations like this. While Mike pounded on the cockpit door, many passengers wondered what would happen next. They didn't know much about the man flying their plane, but if they did, they might have worried less. James Thornton wasn't always a commercial airline pilot. His story began long before he ever wore the uniform of Dallas Air. Born in a small town in Texas, James joined the Air Force at age 22. He wanted to fly the fastest planes in the world, and he did. For 15 years, James flew fighter jets. He was one of the best pilots in his squadron. He flew F-16s over dangerous areas in the Middle East. 3 times, his plane was shot at by enemy weapons. 3 times, he brought his aircraft home safely. Thornton is the calmest man I've ever seen in a crisis, his commander once wrote in a report. When others panic, he thinks clearly. After the Air Force, James didn't go straight to flying passenger planes. Instead, he worked for 3 years training air marshals. These are the special officers who protect flights from dangerous people. He taught them how to handle threats without harming innocent passengers. During this time, James also studied martial arts. He learned how to stop aggressive people without hurting them badly. He became skilled at talking to angry people and making them calm down. Even now, at 52 years old, James stayed in excellent shape. Every morning, he woke up at 5 a.m. to exercise. He could still do 50 push-ups without stopping. Twice a week, he practiced his martial arts skills at a local gym. Always be ready, his first Air Force instructor had told him. You never know when your training will save lives. As a commercial pilot, James had dealt with many difficult situations. Once, a drunk businessman tried to open the emergency exit door mid-flight. Another time, a woman had a serious medical problem, and James had to land the plane quickly to save her life. But in 15 years of flying passenger planes, he had never faced a situation quite like this one. Inside the cockpit, James checked that all the plane's systems were working properly. He put the plane on autopilot, which meant the computer would keep it flying straight and level. "Rick, you have control of the aircraft," he said to his co-pilot. Rick looked worried. "James, let me call Denver. We can have police waiting when we land." James shook his head. "That will take too long. This situation could get worse. I need to handle it now." "But pilots are supposed to stay in the cockpit," Rick argued. "Sometimes rules have to bend a little," James replied. "Keep us on course to Chicago. I'll be back soon." He stood up, straightened his uniform, and took a deep breath. The pounding on the door was getting louder. He could hear the biker shouting threats now. James unlocked the cockpit door, ready to face whatever waited on the other side. The cockpit door opened. Mike the biker had his fist raised, ready to pound on the door again. He was surprised when it suddenly opened. Captain James Thornton stood in the doorway. He wasn't very tall, maybe 5'10", but he stood straight and looked calm. His gray hair was neatly cut, and his uniform was perfectly clean. His eyes were the most striking thing about him, clear blue and completely unafraid. "Can I help you?" James asked in a quiet voice. Mike took a step back, not expecting the captain to come out, but he quickly recovered and puffed out his chest. "Yeah, you can tell your flight attendants to do their jobs and bring us more drinks," Mike shouted, wanting his friends to hear. James nodded slowly. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but my flight crew has a responsibility to ensure everyone's safety on this flight." Mike stepped closer, trying to use his height to look more threatening. He was at least 4 inches taller than the captain and probably 50 pounds heavier. "Listen, old man," Mike said, poking James in the chest with his finger. "We paid good money for these tickets. You work for us." The other passengers watched with wide eyes. Some held up their phones, recording everything. A few looked ready to help if needed, but most were frozen in their seats, afraid of what might happen next. "Sir, I need you to take your hand away and return to your seat," James said, his voice still calm but firmer now. "Or what?" Mike laughed and poked the captain again, harder this time. What happened next was so fast that later, when passengers watched their videos, they had to slow them down to see exactly what occurred. In one smooth motion, James grabbed Mike's finger. He turned his wrist slightly and stepped to the side. Suddenly, Mike found himself bent forward, his arm twisted in a way that didn't hurt much but completely controlled his movement. "What the?" Mike gasped, surprised by how quickly he lost control of the situation. "Sir, I have 2 options for you," James said, still speaking in that same calm voice. "You can return to your seat and behave properly for the rest of this flight, or I can have you arrested when we land in Chicago. Which would you prefer?" Mike struggled for a moment, but quickly realized he couldn't break free without hurting himself. His face turned red with embarrassment. His friends weren't laughing anymore. They sat silently, shocked by what they were seeing. "This is assault." Mike tried to argue. "You can't touch a passenger." "Actually, Federal aviation regulations allow flight crew to restrain passengers who threaten the safety of the aircraft, James explained. Now, what's your choice? The plane was silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Mike finally stopped struggling. Fine, I'll go back to my seat. Good choice, James said. He carefully released Mike's arm and stepped back. Mike walked back to his seat, rubbing his arm and looking embarrassed. His friend sat quietly, no longer laughing or making noise. The whole plane was silent. Captain James stood in the aisle, watching Mike sit down. Then he looked around at all the passengers. Everyone was staring at him with amazed expressions. Ladies and gentlemen, James said in a clear voice that everyone could hear, I want to assure you that this flight is safe. On my aircraft, the safety and comfort of all passengers is the most important thing. He turned to look directly at the bikers. This plane is under my command. Every person on board deserves respect. My crew deserves respect. If anyone cannot follow these simple rules, there will be consequences. The other bikers looked down at their laps, avoiding eye contact with the captain. Mike's face was still red, but he stayed quiet. A small child a few rows back started clapping. Soon, other passengers joined in. They were relieved and grateful that the captain had handled the situation so well. James raised his hand to quiet them. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be landing in Chicago in about 1 hour. As James turned to go back to the cockpit, Sophia, the flight attendant, whispered to him, Should we call ahead for police to meet the plane? James thought for a moment. Yes, but have them wait in the jetway, not on the plane. Let's see how our friends behave for the rest of the flight. Back in the cockpit, Rick looked at James with new respect. Where did you learn to do that? James smiled a little as he sat down. Air Marshal training. The key is to control without causing harm. I've never seen a captain leave the cockpit to handle a passenger like that, Rick said, shaking his head. You could get in trouble for breaking protocol. Sometimes you have to trust your judgment, James replied, checking the flight instruments. Rules are important, but so is knowing when to adapt. For the next hour, the flight continued smoothly. The bikers stayed quiet. One of them even apologized to Carlos when he brought them water. As they approached Chicago, James made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare Airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Sophia came into the cockpit one last time before landing. The bikers have been completely quiet. The big one, Mike, asked if he could speak with you after we land. James raised an eyebrow. Did he say why? No, Sophia answered, but he seemed different, calmer. As the plane touched down in Chicago, James thought about what he would do. The police would be waiting. He could have Mike arrested for interfering with a flight crew, a serious federal offense. The man could face heavy fines or even jail time. But something told James there might be another way to handle this situation. The plane landed smoothly at Chicago O'Hare Airport. Outside, the afternoon sun shined brightly. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, passengers began to gather their belongings. Many people were talking about what they had seen. Some showed each other videos they had recorded on their phones. Did you see how fast he moved? A businessman whispered to the woman sitting next to him. I've never seen anything like it, she replied. That captain is amazing. Several passengers had used the plane's Wi-Fi during the flight to search for information about Captain James Thornton. They found articles about his military career and his heroic actions during his time as a fighter pilot. It says here he saved his entire squadron during a mission in the Middle East, a college student told his friends, reading from his phone. He got a medal for bravery. As the plane reached the gate, Sophia made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Chicago. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Some passengers will be exiting the aircraft first, accompanied by airport security. 2 police officers waited in the jetway. They were ready to arrest the bikers if necessary. Captain James stepped out of the cockpit and spoke quietly with them. There was an incident during the flight, he explained. But I don't think we need to press charges if they leave peacefully. The officers looked surprised. Are you sure, Captain? We heard there was a physical confrontation. There was, James admitted. But I believe in second chances. The officers agreed to follow James' recommendation. They would escort the bikers from the terminal, but not arrest them unless they caused more trouble. James walked back into the plane. "Mr. Mike Davis and companions," he called out. "You'll be exiting the aircraft first, accompanied by these officers." Mike stood up slowly. His friends followed. They gathered their bags without saying anything. As they walked toward the door, Mike stopped in front of Captain James. Everyone watched, wondering what would happen. I want to apologize," Mike said in a low voice. His face looked different now, no longer angry but ashamed. "I behaved badly. I was drinking too much because, well, it doesn't matter why, no excuse." James nodded, his expression serious but not unkind. "Apology accepted. But I hope you understand that actions have consequences." "Yes, sir," Mike replied. "I do now." As the bikers left with the police officers, the other passengers began to exit too. Many stopped to thank James or shake his hand. "You are incredible, Captain. Thank you for keeping us safe. Can I take a picture with you?" James smiled and thanked them but didn't make a big deal about what he had done. For him, it was just part of his job, keeping everyone safe. 3 days after the flight, James was at the Dallas airport preparing for another trip. He was checking his flight plan when Sophia walked up to him. "James, did you see the news? You're famous." She showed him her phone. On the screen was a video of James handling the situation with Mike. Someone had posted it online, and it had over 2 million views already. The title read, "Pilot takes down aggressive biker mid-flight." James shook his head. "I was just doing my job." "Well, the airline CEO called. He wants to meet with you next week," Sophia said with a smile. "I think you might get a promotion." James thanked her and continued with his work. He didn't care about being famous or getting rewards. He only cared about keeping his passengers safe. A week later, James received a strange envelope at his home. Inside was a business card for Davis Motorcycle Repair and a handwritten note. "Captain Thornton, I want to apologize again for my behavior. If you're ever in Chicago, please visit my shop. I have something to tell you. Mike Davis." James was curious. 2 weeks later, he had a flight to Chicago with a 2-day stopover. He decided to visit Mike's shop. The motorcycle repair shop was clean and well organized. Pictures of motorcycles lined the walls. When James walked in, Mike was working on a big black motorcycle. Mike looked up and immediately recognized James. "Captain, you actually came." He wiped his hands on a cloth and walked over. "I was curious about your note," James replied. Mike nodded. "I wanted to explain why I was so angry that day." He pointed to a photo on the wall. It showed Mike in a military uniform. He was younger and smiling, standing next to an Army helicopter. "I was a helicopter mechanic in the Army for 10 years, Mike explained. "After I came home, I had trouble adjusting. Started drinking too much. That day on your plane, it was the anniversary of losing 2 friends in combat. I was trying to forget." James understood immediately. "PTSD?" "Yeah," Mike admitted. "I'm getting help now. Your actions that day, well, they woke me up, made me realize I needed to change." James nodded. Many veterans struggled after coming home. He had seen it many times. "I have something else to show you," Mike said. He led James to a back room. Inside, 5 veterans were sitting in a circle, talking. "This is my support group," Mike explained. "We all work on motorcycles together. It helps us heal." One of the men recognized James from the video. "Hey, you're that pilot." Mike smiled. "Captain Thornton here reminded me that I needed to find better ways to handle my problems." Later, as James was leaving, he had an idea. "Mike, I know many pilots who are also veterans. Would you be interested in working together on something?" 6 months later, a special event made headlines across America. A group of pilots and bikers had joined forces to deliver supplies to a town hit by a tornado. The unusual partnership had started with a difficult encounter on a plane. Sometimes, the most unexpected friendships begin in the most unusual ways.